Members of Council, ladies and gentlemen, the clerk advises me that it is now 7 o'clock, so I will call this council meeting to order. And I would ask you please to stand and join with me in a moment of silent reflection on our national anthem, O Canada. Madam Clerk, are there any agenda announcements and/or amendments? Being none. Disclosure by any member of council this evening? Being none. We will deal with the consent items. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Alay and seconded by Councillor Hamid, and be it resolved that consent items numbers 1 to 9 be approved. And I know, Councillor Ali, you had mentioned that you want number 3 pulled out. We'll pull number 3 out, and I believe, Councillor Best, you had mentioned number 4
yes, I did.
to be pulled out. Is there any other item that any member of council wished pulled out and dealt with separately? Okay, let's deal with them in order. Councillor Ali, number 3.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is pertaining to the Milton Youth Strategy Report, and I just would like to highlight all the hard work that's been put into this research and report from and by the staff and the youth involved in this research, as I am the council representative on this committee. And we all know that council was very interested in the Milton Youth results consultations that came before council in 2018. And especially we were concerned about the youth feeling unwanted, unwelcome, and unsafe in our communities. So it is my firm belief that through this report and the outcomes, we will make a positive impact in our community, wherein based on our demographics, we need to catch up and hopefully surpass others in the services we provide for our youth. I also believe that this report is not intended to be solely for the benefit of the town's service delivery, but a collaborative effort by all youth-serving organizations. And at this point, I would like to highlight some of the folks who have come out to support this report and are sitting in the gallery. It's the Milton Community Resource Center, the MCRC, the Resol Youth Center. I have Mike from there. And Halton Public Health Nurses, I have Monique in the gallery, and Milton Public Library, Reach Out Center for Kids, and our Kids Network. And I also have Ron Taylor from Families for Families, and I was wondering if there was an opportunity for Ron to come up and speak for a bit. And I'm looking at the clerk for this.
First, Councillor Lee, you better look at me to start with. I personally have no problem with that, but keeping in mind that we do have 2 listed delegations, and I know sometimes if we're not really careful, those listed delegations get put to the back burner, and that doesn't work too well, and I know that we've all been there at one point in time. So I'm not sure if it's your wish to have that person come up being 3rd delegation, after we go into committee, and at least in my opinion, that's fine. But there's a potential for it to go on for some time, and there's the potential for what's being recommended here under consent being changed, and then that's when we get ourselves into some difficulty. So, Councillor Ali, your choice.
Thank you, Worship. I will take your lead here, and then we will wait until the delegations are done. And if Ron is still here, then we will bring him on.
I think that might be the wise thing to do. So, Councillor Best, when we go into committee, you'll have to deal with that. So, Madam Clerk, we'll have to pull out number 3, and that may or may not change, but that can be dealt with under consent items when Councillor Best is in the chair. Councillor Ali, that fine?
Thank you, Worship. Yes, that is perfectly fine.
Good, thank you. So that'll be pulled out and dealt with separately in committee. Councillor Best, number 4.
Yes, just through your worship to council and the public, joint and several liability may not be the most exciting topic in the world, but it is a very serious one. I just wanted to encourage councillors to keep aware of this subject, because we have a number of cases before us, and so this is the first time in 15 years the province has actually said something that we might even look into it. So I encourage you to keep up with the AMO weekly news, because I expect some action in the next year and hopefully before the next conference.
Certainly echo those sentiments, not to take a shot at the insurance people, but sometimes it's the courts that can be equally problematic when it comes to dealing with issues such as this that reflects on municipalities, and we're talking about Ontario here for the most part now. So thank you for that. Nothing changes on that then. So is there anything further on 4? If not, we will move ahead. And again, you've heard the motion before, that consent items number 1 to 9 be approved, save and accept item number 3 to be considered during items for consideration. Any questions on that motion? If not, those in favor of the motion, and that's carried. So that will be handled as delegation number 3 after we've heard from the other 2 delegations under Committee of the Whole. Okay, Madam Clerk, have we forgotten anything in regular council? If not, members of council, ladies and gentlemen, this portion of the council meeting is now adjourned. Councillor Best, if you will assume the chair. Thank you. This portion is adjourned.
Evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now start the committee portion. We have 3 delegations tonight. The first one is the subject is the 401 widening. I to call forward Mr. David Ellis and Mr. Ryan Bissonnette, the West Corridor contractors, to make a presentation regarding the widening.
Good evening. I'm David Ellis, Project Director for West Corridor Constructors. With me is Ryan Bissonnette, Communications Director for West Corridor Constructors. And we're here tonight to present to you the 401 expansion project. Also known as WCC, West Corridor Constructors is an all-Canadian joint venture led by Aecon, Parsons, and Amoco. And we're contracted by the Ministry of Transportation Ontario and Infrastructure Ontario to design, build, and finance the Highway 401 expansion through Mississauga and Milton. The project is approximately 18 kilometers long and stretches from the east limit at Credit River to the west side of Regional Road 25 in Milton. It's going to be a combination of 10 and 12 lane widening. So the 12 lane widening with a full core collector system will run from Credit River westerly to Winston Churchill Boulevard. Thereby it'll narrow to a 10 lane widening from Winston Churchill through the 407 ETR interchange. It'll then be widened back to the 12 lane core collector to James Snow Parkway, where it will narrow again to the 10 lane widening through to Regional Road 25, where we'll meet the existing 6 lane configuration. Each section of the highway will include a HOV, high occupancy vehicle lane, one in each direction. And the scope of work will include modifications to the existing infrastructure throughout the corridor to facilitate the widening, including 9 bridge rehabilitations and replacements. Additional scopes of work will include erosion and sediment controls and environmental protection measures, earthwork, excavation, grading, drainage and stormwater management, and a couple of natural channel realignments, culvert replacements, bridge replacement and rehabilitation, lighting, overhead signage, utility relocations, of course paving, and landscaping restoration. This is a visual illustration of the limits of the project, again from the east limit at Credit River to the west side of Regional Road 25. In terms of the scope of the project within the limits of Milton, again it runs from, we'll say Trafalgar Road, I think would be the easterly portion of the Milton component, out to Regional Road 25, and includes interchange works for Regional Road 25, James Snow Parkway, and Trafalgar Road. And some of the major structural scopes within this segment include the replacement of the 16 Mile Creek Culvert, the replacement of the CN Rail Bridge, 16 Mile Creek Culvert just west of 5th Line, the 6th Line underpass structure, and the Oakville Creek East structure, and the Trafalgar Bridge as well. Just to, again, detail the nature of the widening. So from Trafalgar Road to James Snow within the Milton segment would be a 12-lane core collector and 10-lane widening from James Snow to Regional Road 25. And we'll be replacing approximately 6 structures throughout that section. At Trafalgar Road, the bridge will be replaced on the west side of the existing bridge, and therefore a realignment of Trafalgar Road will be required. 6th Line as well, the bridge will be replaced on the west side of the existing bridge, and 6th Line will be realigned accordingly. There will be some minor ramp relocation works associated with Regional Road 25 and James Snow Parkway to facilitate the widened highway. And at Trafalgar Road at the northwest corner, we'll be constructing a new carpool lot. Outside of the Milton limits, so from Trafalgar Road east to Credit River, includes works at Winston Churchill Boulevard and Mississauga Road, again ramp realignments to facilitate the widening, and some of the major structural scopes of work within that region include Oakville Creek culvert replacement. We'll be building a new basket weave at the 407 to facilitate the core collector. Winston Churchill Boulevard will see some structural rehabilitation. Derry Road the overpass structure will be widened and rehabilitated. And some of the structural replacements include the CP overpass, Credit View Road, and Credit River Bridge as well.
Good evening, councillors. Again, I'm Ryan Bissonette, and I'm the Communications Director with the project. And I wanted to talk to you about how we're going to support you as councillors and a legislative body to provide information to the public and share information with us as a project management company and yourselves as a municipality. We have a website. You can see the web address up there. It's really long and it's a mouthful, but we rely on Google for people to find us. And it supports both English and French, and it hosts all our project information and communications materials, as well as provides updates on the process, including the Public Information Center, online comment form to obtain feedback, all of our contact information, phone number, email addresses, office address and office hours, our schedule of meetings for public events and project events, our newsletters and fact sheets, project status and other project related materials, and you can see our project email address there as well. We have a project information telephone line, toll-free number where people can call in. It's manned 24/7 by a professional staff, a live call center based staff. We have a real formal complaints resolution process in place, and that enables us to take stakeholder inquiries during the design and construction period, as well as manage issues that come up through the input that's received, opinions expressed in the media, and community discussions. And we will always endeavor to ensure timely and fulsome responses. All input is given consideration and responses are provided, and all reasonable efforts are made to resolve issues and concerns as they arise. We also have an incident management process in place. It includes a crisis response team. We have well-developed policies, roles, responsibilities, and we're there to manage issues if one arises. And this includes notification and ongoing communication with municipalities such as Milton and emergency services and stakeholders. We also keep you informed through a government authority communications working group to which Milton is a part of, and that provides a forum for us to develop working relationships and protocols, share communications tactics and strategies, collaborate on ideas and opportunities, and identify the existing communications outlets, provide community relations updates, and discuss trends and emerging issues. And we will always provide information to Milton as a municipality and one of our major stakeholders, and we'll do so in a timely fashion. We're open, transparent, we're always proactive, and we're effective. And now we're happy to take your questions.
Yeah, list of speakers. Councillor Schellner.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I've got three. I guess the first question is around noise barriers. And so the width of this highway is going to be considerably wider than it is today. It comes very close to an existing residential development on the south side between James Snow Parkway and, well, there isn't, it's past Highway 25. So when the Tremaine interchange is constructed, it'll go that far. What is the plan with respect to noise barriers?
The ministry conducted two studies during the preliminary design, and it was determined that noise barriers will not be required for this project, so there is no plan to construct noise barriers as part of our contract.
Mr. Chairman, wouldn't it be a bit difficult to conduct a study when you haven't got the volume of traffic or the width of the highway in place already?
Those studies were based on traffic counts to 2041. So those are based on traffic projections out to 2041.
Okay. I think this is going to be an issue that you may want to have further consultation with the town of Milton on. Okay. Second question, the HOV lanes. So the challenge we have with HOV lanes in the province of Ontario today is the highways on which all of them are in place today are overcrowded as it is. And they were put in place when the highways were already constructed, and quite frankly had the impact of diverting traffic and creating a crowded state. So my assumption is that with the work that you've done, you've assumed an adequate number of lanes for existing traffic that you anticipate will be in place, and the HOV lanes are not going to detract from the ability of the traveling community to move along?
So those studies were completed by the ministry, not by West Quarter Constructors. So we are constructing the reference concept in terms of the number of lanes and type of lanes that were contracted to by the ministry.
Okay. My last question is around timing. You don't identify in your presentation when the work would start, how long it would take to do, and when it would be completed.
Okay. So we signed our contract with the contracting authority, which is MTO and IO, April 26th. So we're currently in the design stage. We are looking to break ground later this fall, and substantial completion is set for November of 2022.
And is that includes this section, or is it?
That includes the entire project.
The entire project in 2 years?
4-year project, but November 2022 is when we'll reach substantial completion. Okay.
So my assumption then is that you've got the funding from the province of Ontario that you need.
It's a design build finance, so we actually finance both the design and construction.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Councillor Claude.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your presentation. I know this has been a long-awaited start to this project. Many people have been talking about this for a number of years, and I think different levels of different provincial governments have actually made this announcement over more than once, so I'm glad that it's on there. My question goes along the lines of what Councillor Challoner was bringing up, because on page 3 of the presentation, you had said the lanes are going to go from 12 lanes to 10 lanes, to 12 lanes, to 10 lanes, essentially through the Milton area. And I was just questioning as to, and I think most people would ask, is why don't we just have 12 lanes go all the way through? We all see on the QEW with HOV lanes, when they end, traffic bottles up, and especially during rush hour periods, and we all know what the 401 is like now. Can you just give us I guess an idea of why the number of lanes change through a relatively short part of the highway?
Certainly. The width of the highway, the number of lanes is based on the MTO's traffic studies. So just again, it's not studies that we conduct. It's the preliminary studies that are done before we step into further the design and construct it. So it's based on the MTO traffic counts and what their assessments have concluded in terms of the number of lanes that are required for the future traffic counts.
Second question, I know that this is another what if, because the province has started this process, then stopped it, and then restarted again. But the GTA West Highway, was any, throughout any of these studies, was a potential impact of another GTA West Highway taken into consideration regarding traffic counts on the highway?
Excuse me, could you just speak directly into the mic, where some councillors have some issues with hearing? Thank you.
I can't answer that question, actually. Whether the traffic counts included studies from the Greater Toronto Corridor Highway.
More homework for me. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Malwith.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. This is long overdue, but we know it. Most of my questions have been asked and answered, but so you're confident by the end of 2022 the expansion will be completed?
Very.
Are you guys involved with the expansion at Highway 10?
We are not.
Okay, good, because that's been going on
That's our
for
competitor.
6 years, and it's not getting anywhere. Okay, glad to hear that part of it. Okay, so just finally, is there any opportunity, could we get for council a copy of your presentation?
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Councillor Tesser-Dirksen.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation. Some of my questions have been answered as well, but I have a question with respect to the disruption of normal traffic during the construction. So obviously there's going to be some delays and whatnot. Very difficult, I'm sure, for you to project what time period we'd be looking at and how much of a reduction of active lanes there would be. My primary concern is about people diverting through town to avoid the construction.
So under our contract, we have an obligation to maintain the same number of lanes, 3 lanes that are on the 401 today. So we will not be, in terms of long-term closures, we will not be performing any long-term closures of the highway. We'll be providing the 3 lanes, 3 through lanes that are there today. We will be conducting lane closures at night, similar to most of the highway projects that we all drive through. Based on the nature of the works that we have, certainly when we're talking about bridge replacements, there's going to be bridge demolitions, and there's going to be erecting girders for new bridges, and there will be certainly traffic impacts associated with those. That's certainly large in part Ryan's focus, is to make sure that those impacts are well communicated to the community and the stakeholders, so that the traveling public can plan themselves accordingly.
Thank you. And one more question. Do you have numbers as to what capacity the finished project will be able to handle as far as vehicles?
I do not know. Sorry.
Thank you. That's all.
Mayor Krantz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Picking up on the very first concern that Councillor Chandler raised, and that's the noise barrier walls, and there's no provision for that now. I'm just wondering aloud, Mr. Chairman, there's an issue there already, and I think Councillor Chandler mentioned that, and again, it's not going to go away. It's probably only going to get worse. So what would you suggest, sir, on us doing, you know, before the construction actually happens? I know you shouldn't shoot the messenger. In this case, you're the messenger. I'm well aware of that. So I'm just thinking aloud, Mr. Chairman, there on us, maybe myself, approaching the province and making provision now. But if not now, if it becomes more of a problem in the future, making provision for it. So how do we go about that properly and professionally?
The Ministry of Transportation would be the body to speak to regarding that. Not a political person, sir, so I can't offer the proper steps to engage in that, but that would be the governing body to speak with.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, again, that's one of the things, and I'm sure that staff has already made a note of that, and I think that we should pursue that too, because it will get worse in the future. So this is the time to address it. Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, thank you for your presentation. There's no prepared resolution on this item, so Councillor Chandler?
I'd planned to mention, the mayor brought it up first, but I think it might be advisable to have a senior individual from the Ministry of Transportation appear before council to answer questions and hear our concerns. And while I appreciate the outreach that the contractor has offered, I think it's great. I think that we also need to have that kind of communications on a regular basis through this project with the Ministry of Transportation directly, because at the end of the day, that's your client, and we're a taxpayer. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. If you wanted to make that into a motion, I think it would be even better situation.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. We have a motion from Councillor Chandler to invite the MTO to speak on this item. Councillor Melba, a second. Any questions, the motion? Staff can draft that enough for a wordsmith it. Any questions at all to this? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll be talking to the MTO, and there is, I recognize several gentlemen in the audience that are concerned about this. I've received similar concerns. Our next delegation is going to be introduced by Mr. Glenn Cowan. If you'd like to come forward. We have Frank Laskowski from the Milton Hydro on the hydro battery project. I think, Glenn, you're going to be introducing this one. Thank you.
Thank you. So Council may recall in January this year, Council approved a $9.4 million loan guarantee for MEGS, which is a subsidiary of Milton Hydro. That council direction can proceed at this time as directed based on some changes in both the project costing and a corporate structure required in order to facilitate the project. So Mr. Frank Lazowski is here from MEGS and Milton Hydro tonight to explain the details to council. It is important to note that should this initiative proceed, there's a motion in the body of the staff report that needs to be approved, so that'll need to be put on the floor and voted on by council based on the presentation. So with that, thank you.
Ms. Laskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Your Worship, Mayor, and members of council. As Glenn just alluded to, the project is basically the same project that we had brought before you in January, except that the Japanese manufacturer of the battery, and maybe just as a point of clarification, the battery is a vanadium redox battery, and it is not lithium ion. And one of the reasons that the independent system operator for the province, which basically rules the electricity grid without the whole province, they are looking at different technologies to see what that impact is and see what the benefits or limitations of a particular type would be. So our project definitely needs to be the same type of battery. And unfortunately, when the Japanese manufacturer pulled out of the project, we were scrambling trying to find another one. We have been successful in finding one in the United States, which at least reduced one of the limitations we had in the risk side of trying to ship the battery from Japan. So we now are only dealing with North America. But the North American manufacturer has modified what he deems essential for his terms from a perspective of the capital cost. You may recall that in January there was a capital cost for the battery and a cost associated with the performance guarantees. Those numbers have changed slightly, where this new manufacturer wants a higher price initially but a lower price for the warranty side. The biggest difference in the two projects is really the fact that we have now lost some time. The ISO contract is scheduled to start in November. It is to run 10 years from November to October 2028. We cannot get the battery now in time, and so the big change in the financials is the fact that we have 5 less months of income from the ISO. The project has several benefits to the community as a whole, as well as to the grid, and I believe that some of that information has been provided to you already, and in essence, I'm here to hopefully answer any other questions that you may have.
Is there any questions of the delegation? If none, Councillor Malbuff, I believe you have a proposed motion.
The motion is ready, and I'm prepared to move it.
Just for everyone's information, on page 3 of the staff report, we have the main motion that has been requested of the delegation, which differs from what was in your original staff report. We do need a seconder for this motion. Councillor Chowner? Is there any questions to the motion? If not, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Just in the interest of the audience here, Councillor Ali asked for a gentleman to speak here. I think I would just waive the rules. I just need a motion to move this in 2/3 to allow the gentleman to speak. Councillor Chowner and Mayor Krantz, any questions to allow the delegation to speak? This is regarding the youth strategy. If not, all those in favor? Motion's carried unanimously. Councillor Ali, if you want to introduce the speaker.
Yes, I would like to introduce Ron Taylor from Families for Families organization, if he wishes to come up and say a few words and tell us more about Families for Families.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Council, Mr. Mayor, and Chair. Impromptu as it is, it will sound that way. Halton Families for Families is a community consortium that works to partner with families and seek out families in Halton that are dealing with mental health issues. We're not clinical, so at the door of any event that we put on, we don't ask questions. So effectively, they're open to anyone, and which allows the families to literally come into a safe place where there is no stigma and no judgment. So the children, we've found, actually self-regulate, which is astounding to clinicians that have seen it. When you take away the stigma, when you take away the judgment, when you take away the bullying, when you take away all the things that the child deals with in regular daily life, you all of a sudden see a real person. And the families get a chance to compare notes. Everyone's on a different journey, part of the journey, and they get to compare notes. And somebody that's just starting on their journey maybe meets a family that's 6 years down the road. And so they can start to understand what's ahead and maybe where some of the boulders are and some of the potholes. We're talking about road expansion, so I thought I'd use that. What we're doing is we do socials where it's just essentially a chance for families to exhale. A little bit of a meal and a small craft the family can do together and they can take home. Educational workshops and special events that we find that either we can combine a social and a workshop, or it's something where we can partner with. This month we're actually doing something very similar to that with Jack.org in Burlington. So what we're finding is really where I think I want to get to, is in terms of youth, something that I've personally noticed, and as well within Families for Families that we're collectively noticing. Today's youth, from the outside looking in other words, through an adult lens, if you look at today's youth, you could easily begin to think that this is a group of people that are drifting. And the reason why we feel that is because they're not using and they're not interested in many of the classical pathways that we've taken to get where we are. The educational system's being stressed because they're not interested in that pathway the way it's currently set up. They're not interested in the vocational paths that we've gone down. But what they are interested in is absolutely phenomenal. They would not use the word entrepreneurial, but if you dig deeper and you do a little bit of a deep dive into their interests and what they see for themselves, you'll see an entrepreneur. You'll see a personal CEO. They just don't come out the way we traditionally think of. We didn't have an internet at our disposal when we were kids. When we were teenagers, we pressed the limits just like this group does. All of us could easily testify to status quos being pushed when we were teenagers. But this group has tools to do that with. This group has tools that allow them to be individual disruptors. And so what's happening is you find a YouTube stream being handled by a 17-year-old who's able to make a living as a 17-year-old with a couple of thousand followers who are willing to pay for what's going on that stream. We're not used to that. All we know as adults is that my child is in his room or her room all night long. But if we deep dive, we'll find out there's these mini entrepreneurs. Almost should take away the word mini because some of them are making more than us at this table. It's that causes my heart to explode at the thought of a council willing to invest in that, because that's really what this is. On paper and in black and white, this is simply money going to a project. I get it, but the reality is way beyond that, and I think you guys get that too. The reality is that this is an investment. It's too trite to say it's an investment in our future. It's way more than that. This is literally funding that will find its way into a teenager's development and find its way into allowing some bridges to be built. We have a project where 9 bridges are going to be built, but we've got this project that can build multiple tens of bridges. And those bridges are between generations and between the kids themselves who haven't met yet, the partners and the partnerships that haven't been formed yet but could be formed with a project like this. So I just say thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Just as what remain there, we have a couple of questions. Mayor Krantz.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you for your presentation. I am assuming that you're familiar with the report that you're speaking to.
On a cursory level? I have to say on a cursory level, yes.
Okay, good, thank you. Are you supportive of what the staff are recommending there?
Very.
And if not, you know, what would you like to see? Because, Chair, I mentioned that there may be changes in it, so, and if there was to be changes, what would you advocate?
I think if there was a change, I think realistically, the fact that this becomes an annual expenditure, a line item, so to speak, that is standard, is the bottom line base. When that is instituted, now we've got an opportunity for expansion down the road. But I think it has to be one that is considered to be a standard line item.
Good. So, Chairman, you're in support of what's being recommended here?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you so much, Ron, for coming up and sharing your thoughts with us. This right here is why we do what we do. And I agree with you when you say that it should become a line item. And then I would also further, and I would like to thank my colleagues today for supporting this. I know it was just in principle, but in the future we will come with more ideas.
Yes.
And more asks that are pertinent to a growing demographic such as Milton, which is very, very young now. And if my colleagues perused through the report, they would see that the kids are saying, we have no place to hang out. We have nowhere to go. So they will find other avenues to push their boundaries. So it's very important that we keep doing what we're doing and maybe even take it up a notch. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions to the delegation? If not, thank you, sir, for your presentation. The item 2 or 3 was taken out of the agenda. Is there any questions to the motion? If not, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. We now get on to the next delegation or presentation is the 2020 budget call, and we'll have here a delegation from Ms. Olga Schweshwan afterwards, and also thank all the members of the Mayor's Youth Advisory Committee that attended tonight. Mr. Cowan, if you have your presentation. Okay, sorry, my apologies. I call the delegation, Ms. Olga Schweshwan, if you want to come forward, please. This is regarding the 2020 budget call report.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors, staff, and residents that are in the back. Last year's budget had the dubious honor of being the largest property tax increase in the region, a whopping 8.3%. It's difficult to understand how this happened since Council disapproved of the suggested huge 2019 tax increase and gave direction to staff to produce a budget which would be in line with inflation. I think I recall a figure of 4%. As a taxpayer, this was somewhat comforting because although 4% was above inflation, it finally looked like Council was thinking of the burden a huge tax increase over inflation would have on the little guy taxpayer. So you can appreciate how astonished and betrayed many taxpayers felt when they read in the Milton Champion that Council had approved a tax increase of 8.3% when inflation was 2.2%. The 2020 budget call report calls for another huge tax increase of 9.22%. Well, let's be positive about this. This is better than the 12.82%, which was recommended last year, but it is more than 4 times the inflation because it appears inflation will average out at 2% for this year. It is unlikely that most taxpayers will be fortunate enough to get a 9.22% increase in their income. Seniors, if they have a pension, will get an increase of under 2%. And those that are lucky, and those are the lucky ones, since many seniors do not have pensions. Consistently, councils have raised the municipal portion of the property tax above inflation. We can look at the chart here, starting in 2014. The increase in taxes was 3.63%. Inflation was 0.9%. 2015, 3.4% raise in taxes, inflation 2%. 2016, urban area received a 5.83% increase, inflation was 1.1%, and the rural area was hit with 11.86%. If we look at 2017, 5.3% tax increase for urban, rural 11.14%, inflation was 1.4%. It cannot be forgotten that for the rural area, the property tax increases have been much higher for the taxpayer than in the urban area due to the unjust transfer of the urban services tax levy to the rural area without providing the same or even similar services that are received in the urban area. This remains an issue for rural residents, especially when we look at Hamilton and Burlington that have a differentiated tax, which recognizes that rural areas do not receive the superior services which are received in the urban area, such as transit, sidewalks, superior road surfaces, and we only receive in the rural area urban fire oversight. So back to the chart, 2018, there was an increase of 5.6%, inflation was 2%. And then last year, 2019, 8.3%, inflation 2.2%. And again, I'll repeat it, that was the largest property tax increase in the region. Potentially for 2020, we have 9.2%, and inflation, it looks like it will be coming in at 2%. The budget call report talks about affordability. According to the staff report, the total municipal burden it's listed as a percentage of the household income, and it's listed at 3.4%. What staff has neglected to mention is that the average income used for this figure is $128,664. The average income. So the 3.4% impact is based on a salary or an income, a total family income of $128,664. How this figure was determined in the BMA municipal study is a mystery. I can tell you definitively that the average household income among seniors is not $128,664. And for most Milton households, it would not be the average income. The average employment income in Ontario, according to Stats Canada, varies depending on age. The latest figures available are for 2017. So for ages 25 to 35, the average salary is $43,700. The median is $37,400. Age 56 to 60, the average salary is $56,600. The median is $48,500. For those 65 plus, the average salary is $43,500. The median is $30,300. So using the figure of $128,664 to determine the tax burden of 3.4% is misleading. The burden would be far greater depending on your age, and for seniors, it would be 3 times greater, around 10%. One of the biggest expenses is human resources. Every year we hear about personnel deficits. However, there is no clear accounting for salaries and benefits which employees receive. For 2018, and probably more for 2019, 103 Milton employees were on the Sunshine List, where salaries are over $100,000. The top earner was the CAO, who earned slightly under $300,000. The Sunshine List increased by 55 employees in 2018 from 48,000 employees the previous year and to 103 employees for 2018. Even if these increases were retroactive payments related to collective bargaining agreement, these salaries represent $12,938,830.62 of taxpayer monies being paid to just 103 Milton staff. I believe Milton employs somewhere more than 500 employees. These individuals on the Sunshine List would have no problems absorbing a 9.22% increase in taxes. However, the reality is that the average salary for most taxpayers is not over $100,000, and it is unlikely that most taxpayers will be receiving a 9.22% salary increase. I would say the staff and council, I would ask the staff and council to please keep in mind when increasing taxes. Perhaps a salary freeze would be in order for those making perhaps over $125,000. The other expenditure that we don't have a real figure on is consulting fees. There is no aggregate figure available to answer what are these fees. The top salary earners in Milton are commissioners, department heads. They are earning salaries over $150,000. So why are we hiring consultants when we are paying huge salaries to staff who hold the top jobs? I would expect these individuals would have the expertise to do the work of the consultants. Yet Milton expends, I would expect, a great deal of money on consultants. There is Dilton for fire service master plan. There's Blackline Consulting for service delivery, and Nanos to do the tax survey, and the list goes on. But not too long ago, staff did the survey using a free online survey site. Why can't that be done today? So tonight, council, you can do the right thing and give direction to staff to develop a budget in line with inflation, which is around 2%. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Any questions of the delegation? If not, thank you very much, and we'll be on to the report. Staff are available for questions regarding the presentation. Or staff, did you want to introduce this item?
Through the chair, I think given the discussion last week, we're happy to answer any and all questions that council may have, but just look forward to council's discussion on it.
Okay, I'm open to Councillor Ali.
I have a question for Glenn. To reach a 2% tax increase, how many services will we have to cut?
Through the chair, there isn't a specific answer I can give you to that. Obviously, it would depend on the specific services involved, which we would go back and with the entire management team look at what the options would be.
Thank you, Glenn. So you're saying that if we want to keep important and really necessary services and facilities like the senior center, we need to make sure that our tax increases reflect that.
Through the chair, our message is hopefully consistently that we try to provide council the information on the balance of the affordability, the service levels, and sustainability. The number that you see referenced in the report, I think it was referred to as a recommendation earlier. It's actually just what we're presenting as what we see as the budget pressures associated with our current service levels on a sustainable basis.
Thank you, Glenn.
Councillor Clewett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And it's further along the same lines, because if we look to page 13 of the staff report, page 161 of the agenda package, during our consultations last week, our workshop, I had brought this up as well, because this pretty much lays out the future of where we're going. Staff has been really good this time with the budget call report, not just focusing on a year-to-year, but sort of a multi-year process, which I think is long overdue when it comes to budgeting, especially in the times that we're in now. The fact that we have low assessment growth, which has had an impact. The fact that our non-residential growth has had an impact on that is part of the reason why we're in this situation today. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train coming towards us. We're seeing more and more activity coming at Dairy Green Business Park, which will bring on much-needed development charges, which will bring on much-needed property tax revenue, but that's coming down the road. And also there's a lot of the what-ifs when it comes to regional review, when it comes to Bill 108, when it comes to those regulations, when it comes to a whole bunch of other things that are really without our control. This is what we need to focus on, because this is within our control. And I know that everybody has, there's people who have appetites for keeping tax increases to a 2% or in and around the rate of inflation. And I bring back this schedule that's on page 13 as staff works through and prepares the budget book for this year's presentation for council members, if they desire, go through this list here of the growth-related expenditures. Sherwood, the fire station. Are we going to build a fire station and not staff it? Are we not going to build it anymore? Or Sherwood Community Center and Branch Library, are we going to close that down just for the sake of keeping down to a magical number? Are we going to take away money for state of our good repair of our roads? Are we going to let our roads deteriorate even further? These are the decisions that are going to have to be made. So I commend staff for putting this together. It's not an easy budget report to go through. It's not an easy decision. It won't be an easy decision for for members of council. But when the budget comes, if anybody wants to get to 3 or 4 or 5, come with a list of things that are included in this report and with justification to cut them, because that's exactly what we're going to have to do. It's imperative, and I know that with the report that was done, the service review, I know we'll find some savings in there. I'm confident that staff is going to take this budget call report and come back with a number. It may not be 9.2, it may be something lower. They may find some more efficiency somewhere. But this time around, come prepared. If anybody wants to hack and slash, I want everybody to come with justifications to do so, instead of just saying no. Let's work with this. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. I know it's going to hurt in the next little while, but I think for the benefit of the corporation, the financial stability of the corporation, that this is probably the best course of action. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Challoner.
Chairman, once the comments have been completed, then I'll bring forward the motion with respect to budget direction at the appropriate time.
Yeah. I should have a list of questions first. Possibly get back to you regarding that amendment first, because I have questions to staff. Councillor Tessler-Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to see if staff could comment for our benefit again and for the benefit of the public about the impact that the cancellation of the provincial gas tax program has had, as well as the loss of funding from the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund.
With respect to the provincial gas tax, the previous announcement that we were anticipating was that the program would double from 2 cents a litre to 4 cents a litre. So for the town of Milton, what that would have meant was currently we receive around $968,000 a year in funding. We apply that directly into the operating costs of our transit system. Had that program doubled, at minimum, assuming we would have continued on the growth we're on in terms of transit ridership, we would have expected just under another $1 million of funding eventually. I think it was a 2 or 3 year phase-in for that, which we would have incorporated to help accommodate some of the needs of the transit master plan and mitigate some of the pressure that you see here. So obviously without those increases, we've maintained the forecast at our current levels, just subject to the inflationary changes. For the Community Infrastructure Fund, aside from the federal gas tax, which is really the only permanent funding, sustainable funding source we have in capital, aside from the slot revenue, we were receiving previously funding through that program, which we were then immediately reinvesting in our rehabilitation projects. So the latest in the last year of the program for us was about $3 million. So without that funding going forward, the need hasn't changed. It's just one less funding tool that we have.
That's a significant loss. I also want to comment on we're putting away $1 million a year to decrease our capital shortfall. Is that correct? How is that coming along with as far as this actually putting the money away? Is it being eaten away at all?
So we're on, I think it'll be year 3 now through the 2020 program if we continue with the level of investment. So we're still building up the base. We have made significant progress if you look at where capital funding was about 10 years ago till today. The last 2 years have had a significant impact in terms of building up that annual amount that we have. We still have a way to go before we get to where the sustainable funding level is, but it is an important piece. We are also, the other part of the strategy, the policy was, as we're bringing on new assets, putting a funding contribution into reserve for them to make sure that any new asset doesn't make the deficit larger as well. And that's another important piece as well. So we have a 10-year funded capital plan that we presented through last year's budget. Every project you see had a funding source identified. Also, with the new measures, we were able to start to show the infrastructure renewal reserve growing a little bit over the time period. We're around $33 million now. It was anticipated to grow to just over $100 million. We're currently working through the preliminary 10-year forecast for this year's budget, and through things like the State of Infrastructure report that you received on road pavement, we know that there's additional investment in the 10-year now needed. So we're kind of working through how much do we trade off some of that reserve balance to deliver the projects that we know we'll need.
Thank you. And maybe not so much a question, but a comment with respect to the core services review that we recently received, which I'm presuming we paid quite a bit of money for. The proposed increase in the budget call report is simply to maintain the current level of services. I'm wondering, perhaps this is just something for my colleagues to think about, how do we want to see the recommendations in the core services review addressed in the budget coming forward? How do we want to deal with that? If staff wish to comment, that's fine too.
I would just add the clarity that the table you see tonight presented in the budget call report does not reflect yet the timing of the specific initiatives from that service delivery. You'll see more of that in the final budget.
Thank you, that's all.
Councillor Malvo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very briefly, we got 3 months to discuss this budget, so, but just, I want to thank staff for this report. This is one of the most comprehensive and informative pre-budget reports that I've seen in the 15 budgets that I've worked on in this council. So I appreciate staff's input into this and all the work they put into it. There's a lot of information here that we are going to have to consider. What direction do we want to go? 9.2 to me is unrealistic. I have an issue with that. And staff is going to have to really make a pitch to get me anywhere near there. But there are things in here, you know, we keep building new facilities, we have to man them. You can't build a sports center and not put employees in there to operate it. So that increases the cost. So these are things we're going to look at. We have the surveys, but again, I take those with a grain of salt. We got approximately 800 responses, 125,000 people, 40,000 property owners. We hear from 800, and I suspect the majority of those are promoting their own special self-interest, whether they be favorable for more sports facilities, more transit, more library services. So they're all. So that's where the surveys. I'll look at them, but again, I'm going to be looking at, okay, are there efficiencies? What recommendations is staff going to come back at? And I heard, and you know, I'm waiting to hear what other members of council have to say as to, you know, to justify whatever increase they're looking at. But again, I think there are efficiencies that can be found, and like I said, we've got 3 months to look at that and review it. So look forward to the next couple of months.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you. I agree with my colleague that 9.2 is a big number. It's not an easy decision that we will be making in 3 months. Having said that, when I read this report, it says that in recognition of the cost pressures and consistent with the results of the 2018 and 2019 budgets, staff be directed to minimize the number of service level increases proposed for 2020. When I read something like that, it really concerns me because we are a growing town, a very fast growing town, the fastest in the GDA, maybe in Canada, and we're asking staff to minimize service level increases. I don't think staff should ever feel restricted to minimize or to downplay service level increases that are required for this growing community. They should come up with them as they feel. It is up to us then to debate and see what is more prior to what. So it concerns me to see this here. That's just my comment.
Thank you. Is there any further questions of staff? Yeah. Mayor Krantz, and I'll be getting back to Councillor Challoner after this.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the reason Councillor Challoner is holding off, and I have no idea what he's proposing, but let me go on record that I'm not going to be supporting anything anywhere near 9.2, and I'm sure that comes as no surprise to anybody. I didn't support 8.3 last year, but I was on the losing end of that, of course. All you had to do is look at that presentation that Ms. Hushin put up there before, and I didn't add it up, but I would imagine in the past 5 years that our tax increase has gone up probably in excess of 30%. Inflation over that same period of time has gone up 10%. I'm really concerned about that. I wasn't elected to create huge bureaucracies, and I'm well aware if we build a new center, it's got to be staffed, and I don't have a problem with that. But it's other areas that we got to have a real close look at, like the administration, you know, and I'm not going to single out any one department, but, you know, you got to have people to plow the roads and mow that where that. You got to have people to operate those centers. So staff is looking for direction. It's up to us to give them that direction, and I think that's maybe where Councillor Challoner is going. Make no mistake that when staff is directed by council, they'll carry it out and carry it out well. It won't be politicized by me or the majority of us. They'll do it and do it well. And will we see any great, huge cuts in services? No. I can assure you of that. We won't. Because they will make it well known that, as an example, you're going to close down the senior center. I've already gone on record that that ain't going to happen. Now, let anybody around this table stand up and say, I'm going to close a senior center. Ain't going to happen, Mr. Chairman. That's the reality of it. So I'm not afraid to meet it head right on, and I think Councillor Melbu was right. Lots of time. but that hour of decision is 3 months away, and that's where every one of us will have to stand up and be counted. I don't want to have to be associated with the council being the most spendthrift council in record, because we're already heading that way. So I just don't want to be any part of it, so thank you. So I look forward to what Councillor Challoner's got.
Okay, Councillor Challoner, back to you. I have an amendment in front of me moved by yourself and seconded by Councillor Melville. If you'd like to introduce that, and we can have a discussion on this amendment.
If you want to read it, then I'll speak to it.
Sure, I'll read it. And it's be it resolved that number 4, this is on the motion that was been moved by Councillor Ali and seconded by Councillor Hamed, which is your staff recommendation, that number 4 be deleted in its entirety and replaced by the following new number 4. That staff be directed to prepare and submit the 2020 operating budget with a range of residential tax impacts between 3 and 5%.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, with respect to that. So I understand, what has been said, and certainly what has been written, and have heard that for 25 years. And I don't think that we're going to find an awful lot through the core services review this year, but I think we will next year. We're looking at additional departments next year, and some of the matters that were raised by the consultant would come into fruition in 2020. So, much of that roughly $650,000 savings would be seen next year, which is closing in on about a 2% increase, tax increase by itself, 1.5 roughly. I understand the comment that was made about service levels. Again, I've heard that before and read that before, and at the end of the day it comes down to what are our priorities. And today, I think all of us understand that we probably haven't been as crisp on our priorities as a municipality as we should have been. And so we're doing things that we shouldn't be doing. And I believe that, that was one of the findings of the core services review, which is why there's a $650,000 savings identified. Could be more, could be less, depending on what we decide around this table. I'm comfortable with because of what happened last year, a step that doesn't take us, all the way to the rate of inflation, but gets us somewhere halfway between. I think that's a responsible response to what occurred last year. I think that given what has happened with revenue flow in, and assessment growth and those kinds of things, I think the 3 to 5% range is a responsible range and certainly achievable. But while I understand what is written in the report, I don't agree with all of it. I know that all of it is not entirely factual either, and so it needs to be challenged, and that's our responsibility as stewards of this corporation and stewards of this community. And so that's why I'm suggesting 3 to 5. I think it's doable. I circulated to my fellow members of council as well as to staff today a couple of, I think, fairly pertinent pieces of information. One was from the Globe and Mail on the weekend, and it talks about the stress, quite frankly, that Miltonians are under. Some of our communities within this community are under financial stress. It was identified in the Globe report. It's factual information. The level of interest and taxation that they're paying is high. Milton is being looked at by other municipalities as a place to live for that reason. But we have our own problems as well. And I think that this was identified last year as an issue, and it's been an issue in this community for quite a while, and I think that we need to be cognizant about, what can our citizens afford? And the fact of the matter is, while they're earning a little bit more money than was identified by the delegation in this community, Halton is one of the wealthiest regions in Canada, so the average income is a little bit higher than that. Still, people are living paycheck to paycheck. And the reality is they are $200 away from a problem. And we know that when we walk through our community, we can see it and we hear it. And so we have a responsibility to assess what they need in the way of town services. And the fact of the matter is, we're not at a point in this community where the majority of Miltonians dislike the level of service. Most are very happy with the level of service. If the service was frozen or pared slightly, would they even notice? I doubt that. And so we've got a responsibility to understand where that can take place, because I think we all know from last year 8 wasn't satisfactory, 9's not going to be satisfactory, but I also will acknowledge the reality that we need to step back, and we can't step back to the rate of inflation. That's not realistic. Would it be realistic in the future once we've done our core services review? I think it will be, but I acknowledge it's probably not realistic this year. I would also ask council to take a look around at the municipalities that surround us and see what they're doing in the way of their tax increases last year and this year. The city of Burlington last year, 2%. Oakville wasn't much higher. There's learnings there. I realize, municipalities are not all the same. They are different. They have different cost structures. But I think there are some things that we can learn in the next 3 months that may help us, may guide us. And with that, I'll leave it to others.
I have a number of speakers now. Councillor Hamid.
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, so my thoughts will be all over the place. But I do want to, I don't support the motion. I want to explain why. I don't know what the number is going to be. I'm not comfortable with 9% either, because I want to keep my job. But whether it's 3%, 4%, 5%, that's really the council's decision. My issue with giving staff a number is that, for the sake of argument, and again, I don't know if that's true, but for the sake of argument, if maintaining the service level standard costs 6%, for sake of argument, then staff has to decide what services to cut, and that's not staff's job. Staff's job is to give council the information, so council makes a decision, and it's up to us to decide what the service level should be. It's not the staff decision. I do want to touch on other communities, because that's an argument that came up talking to residents as well. We can't, I mean, an average house in Oakville, I can't remember the number right now, it's in the report, I looked at it before. An average house in Oakville probably pays $700, $800, $900, $1,000 more in property taxes than Milton does. So 2% increase on top of that is really, in my mind, unjustifiable. So to look at just the percentage increase and not look at the whole amount they're paying, even after our 8% increase and their 2% increase in Burlington and Oakville, they're still paying substantially more. 30 or 40% more, if I remember correctly. I think Burlington is closest to us, or Halton Hills is closest to us, but even they are 20% above where we are. So we can't just look at the percentage increase. We'll have a bigger discussion at the budget time. Right now, I just want to talk about giving staff direction of 3 to 5%. That might, because I don't know if that's reasonable or not, so I just want to stick with that. The thing that we need to think about is what kind of municipality we want to create. We really don't need to be a Walmart of municipalities. That doesn't mean we become a Whole Foods of municipalities, and I'm getting hungry with my analogies here. Wherever we land, it's the council's decision. I don't want staff to make that decision. That's our responsibility, not staff responsibility. I'd rather staff give us every single piece of information they can, give us all the data they can, and then we debate, we make the decision, and we own it, or not own it, but it's really up to us, because the buck stops at us, not at staff. Thank you.
Councillor Ali.
Thank you. I will also not be supporting the motion, because for the past year, I got only one email asking me about the tax increase. I got no negative feedback at all.
Councillor Malbuff.
Thank you. Councillor Challoner expressed most of my position on this, very similar. I believe that we have a responsibility to give staff some type of direction where we want to go. Quite evident nobody wants to support 9, but does that mean we're going to support 7, 8, 7.5? I think by narrowing the criteria to staff, it allows them to look at exactly where they're going to go. If you give them too much of a spread, now it comes down to, again, nitpicking, everybody picking their own pet projects, and here we go again. So I support, we've done it for years in previous budgets, right, where we gave staff direction, here's your limit, find your savings, that's what they get paid for. They're the frontline people on these issues and providing services, not us. So I believe we should be giving them a direction. Yeah, 5% is approximately twice the rate of inflation. I can live with that. We do have service level increases. We have brought on new services, new facilities. So yeah, rate of inflation is not feasible. But I think twice the rate of inflation is sufficient, and I'm supporting this to give a direction. And just, Mr. Chair, just in closing, I don't remember any member of council in their election platforms not too long ago running on a platform, vote for me and I will increase your taxes at 4 to 5 times the rate of inflation. I don't remember ever hearing that during the campaign.
Councillor Cluett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'm bringing up that page 13 that specifically outlines what staff has called essential to continue our service levels. With the recent service report review, they might come down, that number might come down a little bit. But what I'm more concerned with is if we give, and we have done in the past, and we fall into this trap year after year after year, where we get a decision package in our budget, we get our packages delivered to us, and everybody opens it up, and we all flip to those 10 blue pages, and then we sit there and we go back and forth, and our budget meeting is basically just find how we're going to get down, not really concerned about what services we're cutting, but how to get down to that magic number. And that's not the best way to deal with the situation that we're in. Staff has come back with a multi-year plan. If we want to be at 20% behind, because currently right now we're 28% behind those lowest, the other lowest areas in Halton. Do we want to be at 20%? And if we do choose to be at 20%, here's what the tax increases are going to look like over the next few years. If we choose to be at 15% below the lowest and being the lowest in Halton region, here's what those increases are going to look like. If we want to choose to be 10%, it's a multi-year plan that has been set out before us. I hear it all the time, government should act like a business. Well, if a business was in a situation like this, with declining revenues and long-term and short and long-term issues that they have to be faced, this is what a business would come up with in a long-term action plan. And if we sit here and handcuff staff, because I know it's going to happen, they're going to say, let's say 8.5, and now to get it down to 5%, here's the blue decision pages. And all of those same items that we said yes and no to last year are going to pop up. We're going to go back and forth. We're going to be at 5.5, and then someone's going to go, let's cut another 0.5% just to get to that magical number, and we're not managing the services that this corporation needs in order to service the public and here in Milton. And we have a letter here from Scott McCammon, who's the president of the Chamber of Commerce, who has taken a cursory review of the budget call report and has talked about the multi-year budget strategy recommended by town staff is not only prudent, it should also ensure any budget decisions are made with current and future pressures and opportunities in mind. For example, a large tax increase in 2020 may be mitigated with the infusion of revenues from the Dairy Grain Business Park. This may also assure taxpayers that made any decisions made today, particularly difficult ones, may relive future potential impacts, positive impacts. This is the approach that I think we need to take. If we send staff back with 0 to 5, we know it's not going to be 0 to begin with. We also know from conversations that we've had through this budget call report that 2% is not doable, 3% is within the thing. So now we're going to be looking at, the whole focus will be on what do we cut, instead of designing and building a complete community that we should be in the long-range aspect of things when it comes to our budget. It's not a desirable number to reach. We don't want to be at this situation, but we're in this situation now, and we have to deal with it going forward. That's why we've been here. We've been talking and speaking to those who went door knocking during the last campaign. We talked about fiscal and financial responsibility. We didn't talk about tax increases, but we talked about managing this corporation's money the best we possibly can, and that's what we're going to do over the next 3 months as we hit the budget.
Councillor Tessler-Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm just looking for some clarification, and I'll welcome it from staff or even from my fellow councillors here. What staff have brought us is a percentage increase to maintain the level of service we are at. So any decrease to that number will require us to decide cutting services. Last year, we got our pages, our options, and chose which services we were willing to do without in order to get to the number we wanted. So I'm hearing that what's being proposed is going to be the same thing as last year, and maybe Councillor Challoner can address that. I don't have a problem with freezing service levels, but I don't think cutting them is going to be something that's palatable to residents. I voted for the increase last year, and I received a handful of emails and a phone call or two. It really wasn't the impact that I thought it would be, to be honest. And just for the record, when I was campaigning, I addressed taxes. It's still up on my website. I said that it is in the nature of taxes to increase. I cannot promise that taxes would be frozen or decreased. What we can promise is that we'll make good decisions and deal with the money, the trust that taxpayers have put in us, and use their money wisely. I mean, as long as it's being spent wisely, ethically, and we're getting the maximum use out of their dollars, I think they understand that. People are reasonable. So I will ask, perhaps through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Challoner, to clarify. Thank you.
Councillor Challoner.
Yeah, so with respect to 3 to 5, it may very well be a situation where you freeze. The way it's worked in the past, and Councillor Malbus is correct. I mean, from the time that I first served until I finished, we provided staff with direction, and at that time, it was 0, 1, or 2, and we ended up at 0 for 10 years, and the assessment growth that we had dealt with the increases in service that we required, or the addition of new services. There were also other revenue sources that included program fees. At the time, the province was a greater participant in our annual budgets. So the reality is that we have to provide direction. That's how responsible councils work in this province. It's how they work in this country. And what I saw last year was not responsible. It was an impasse. I did bring some thoughts with respect to how we could get below 8.3, as did Councillor Malbuf and some others. They were not supported. And that's fine. We live in a democracy. But the problem was, and staff acknowledge it, there was no direction. And when there is no direction, then don't expect staff to come forward with a budget that meets the requirement. And I don't think very many people can sit around this table and suggest that they were satisfied with the budget process last year. I know you weren't. That's why we have, and I'm not saying you specifically, but us. That's why we have that financial education process that we're going through. I disagree fundamentally with Councillor Cluett on the comment about how business operates. That's not how business operates. When business has an issue, and we have to deal with essentially a deficit or a situation that makes us uncompetitive in the marketplace, and right now, I would suggest that today, for the last 12 months, the town of Milton has been uncompetitive in the marketplace from a business standpoint because we're not, quite frankly, providing key services at a cost that is affordable for this community. This community cannot afford an 8.3% increase. That's a fact. And just because you haven't heard a complaint doesn't mean that people are unhappy. I can tell you people are unhappy, and the delegation is right. Seniors have no way to deal with 8.3%. I know most people in the private sector are not even getting an inflationary increase this year. They'd be lucky to have a job next year. So I'm not sure that really matters. I mean, people aren't paying attention to what we do around this table. They expect us to operate in their best interest. That's why we were elected. they don't have time to be calling us or writing us and telling us, their deepermost thoughts about tax increases. They expect us to handle things responsibly. And, I think that we've already seen through the core services review that there are things we can do to make the system better within the corporation. And I think we'll find more as we go through it. But we have to make an effort to get to a number that is somewhere between 3% and 5%. And I said at the end of the last budget discussion in February, we need to step this back in 2020. And it may be 2021 before we see the full benefit, and I would suggest that based on what I've read in the core services review, that's the case. But I honestly, Councillor, don't have an awful lot of faith in this council to go from 9.2 to a number that, quite frankly, people expect us to get to. And it's not because people don't want to get there around this table, as they don't know how to get there. And it's partly why we're having the financial education that we're having, but we have a professional staff. It's their responsibility to do that, and they can't do it without direction. Without direction, this would not be the community it is today. This community was seeing 5% tax increases every year through the 1980s, and it was unsustainable. We weren't growing. And when I joined council, the first year I took my punch in the side of the head. We had a 5% tax increase because I didn't understand how I could affect change in that respect. I found out very quickly how I could, and after that, and there's still some who were there at that time, we made the changes necessary, and the biggest thing we did was we provided direction. We've got a responsibility to provide direction. It's not feasible to expect the people around this table to take a 9% budget and pare it back to 5%. You don't have the information that you need to do that. You have some information, but you don't have all of it. And so you're not doing yourselves any favors. And if you believe that, page 13 represents what we have to do, it doesn't. I can assure you that it doesn't. I've seen that page many times before from many organizations, and I understand staff's position, and I think they also understand my position. I hope that clarifies.
Councillor Tessler-Dirksen, any further?
Yes, thank you. And I just do want to respond. So correct me if I'm wrong. So then wouldn't the best direction to give staff would be not so much asking them to come back with a particular number, but should we be looking at where we want them to focus as far as services? Because what's going to happen this year, again, I feel is going to be the same thing that happened last year. We sent them back come back with 4%, I think it was, and then they were.
Could I have it through the chair, please?
Okay, if memory serves correct, and I'll stand corrected with that, but it just feels like we're kind of on the same trajectory. So if there is a way that we can debate where we want staff to focus, if that's the direction we give them, again, they've come to us with this number saying this is to maintain the status quo, then I guess it would be up to us to say, well, please take a second look at this particular service, or provide us some more information on this particular department. I feel like that would be useful direction for them, instead of them kind of wasting their time flopping around trying to reach a particular number that we've given them.
Hopefully our treasurer can provide some clarification.
So to clarify last year's process, the directions read that staff bring to council identification of the cost of existing service and options to help council basically manage that through the budget. And the ultimate range of options provided, I believe, was in the order of 3% to the 8% pressure that was the final budget. The comment made about what's most beneficial to staff, I do agree. Any direction that council as a whole can give in terms of what areas we should start looking at. You're familiar with the ideas that we've generated through the Blue Page discussion, through the service delivery review. Either those or other ones, if there's a consensus of council of where the most likely areas to look should be, something like that would be beneficial for staff.
Anything further, Councillor Tessler?
No, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hamid.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify a few things. One, we should give staff direction, obviously. I mean, that's our job. And the kind of staff direction I want to see is exactly what was mentioned earlier. I want to see what would it take to maintain the services we provide today. If you want to cut something, how do we get down to a couple of percentage points below that? And if we had the appetite to add, then what would a couple of percentage points above that will give us? I have an issue with arguing about numbers without specifics, because in certain scenarios, 1% increase is too big an increase. In other scenarios, 5% is too small. We need to know what that means, and without knowing what that means, we can't make that decision. In fact, I was around the council. I remember one of the budget year, I think it was 2014, 2015, something like that. The number came out at 3.55%. A majority of council thought it was too high and voted against it, myself included. We removed some more items, it brought it lower, and then we voted for it, because that 3% was too high that year. So it really depends on what's on the table. It depends on the situation, depends on what's happening. And I have an issue with just giving a number without specifics. And the specific would be, what I need to know is, in different areas that we provide service, what would it take to maintain those services? And then we make the decision. One issue I've always had, and I've always found it weird, we always use low-income families as an argument to cut taxes. The irony is that when it comes to cutting services, like we are talking about removing a transit route, bus number 10, when it comes to cutting services, these are the families that are impacted. Families like most of ours are not the ones taking transit. It's low-income seniors, the students who don't have the money, they're the ones that are impacted by it. We pocket the money using them as an argument, but we cut the services and we really impact them, and that's what I have an issue with. When we made a decision to cut library hours, it's seniors and those families that were impacted, not us. I don't remember the last time I went to the library. And so we need to think about, like Councillor Cluett said, what kind of community we want to create, and that's the real question. And businesses honestly do not operate like this. A business that only focuses on short term and does not have a vision of where they want to go in the long term will not survive, will not be able to compete, end of story. You can't be obsessed about bottom line in the short term without understanding how to improve your financial situation in the long term. So I do want to talk about, because 0% tax increase has been mentioned. When we got elected, when I got elected, Councillor Cluett and Councillor Di Lorenzo, I think, and Councillor Melboff as well, we came on the same board. Our infrastructure asset management fund had almost nothing. We're the ones that started putting money towards it. We only still have $33 million for almost $1 billion of infrastructure. That's unthinkable in private sector. How do we maintain that infrastructure? We have nothing. When you compare ourselves to Halton, Burlington, Oakville, everyone has hundreds of millions of dollars sitting there. Halton has billions, actually, which is another different issue. They have too much. There is such a thing. But there needs to be a better balance. We can't be a municipality with hundreds of millions of dollars in assets and $33 million to maintain it. We're playing with fire here. And last year's increase included the increase to put money aside in that fund, not to spend. It wasn't us taxing and spending. It was us putting money aside that we wouldn't have to had previous councils been doing it, including the time when I was here. I dropped the ball as well if we were doing it all along. And I think we are doing the fiscally responsible thing by putting money aside. We're doing the fiscally responsible thing by asking staff to give us data on what it takes to maintain services, what it takes to increase them, what it takes to decrease them, and then we make the decision. I don't want staff to be in a position where they decide to cut something somewhere, which without us making that call. And lastly, I do want to talk about that just briefly. I'm very uncomfortable with us dismissing when people do give us feedback. Hundreds of people taking a municipal survey is actually very impressive. If you talk to municipalities around us, hundreds of people filling out a survey for a municipal tax process is actually very, very impressive. It's because people tell us something that we don't want to hear. It doesn't mean we just dismiss them altogether and say, oh, well, they're only special interest group, but everybody I talk to is different. It's not right to just write them off like that. It's also not correct to insist that somehow there's a silent majority that's not talking to us. They're not talking to us after the 8% increase. They're not coming out to make the allegations. They're not sending us emails. They're not filling out a survey, but they're out there. I would say that most people we talk to, and I just went through an election campaign where I knocked on every door, so did Councillor Lee and Councillor Cluett and Di Lorenzo and others as well. We heard very different things. What we heard is that I have young kids and I'm sick and tired of driving them around. Why don't we have a bus for them to go to? I've heard more complaints about a single GO bus being removed that goes to park and ride lot just that one bus route. I've heard more complaints about that than previous many, many years of tax increases combined. Because those are the issues that hit people at home. That means a lot of families had to go out, buy another car just because of that one bus. It actually impacted them far more than whatever taxes. And I know I said last thing, but I will say last thing now. When we talk about tax increases, percentages are often very deceiving. Councilor Chandler forwarded an email today about 8% mill rate. A mill rate didn't go up by 8%. And a low-income senior or a low-income family living in $500,000 or $600,000 or $700,000 house, they're looking at a couple of bucks a month. And to go to them and say, hey, man, we'll save you $2 a month, but this bus that you rely on is no longer going to exist, or the senior center is going to close, or the Rotary Pool is going to close. I always find it strange that we don't want to close anything. We don't want to take any service away, and yet we don't want to pay for it. It just doesn't work that way. So after my rant, the direction that I would like to give staff is that I want to know what the number is to maintain service standard. I want to know what we get if we were willing to spend a couple of points more, and I want to know what we need to cut if we needed to cut a couple of points less than that. So that's the real range. I don't know what that number is, but that's what I want staff to work on. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Chalner.
Yeah, when you give staff direction, that's what they are working on. That's the reality. And that's been the reality as it ever was, and it's the case in every municipality in Canada. It's the case in business. Any business that I've been involved with in the last 40 years, you were told your marching orders were this percentage number, and it was based on, sales, what sales thought they could do. So in this case, what is the revenue situation coming in, and what can we do when you take out the expenses? Where are we? We have to have a certain amount of profit. And profit in this case would be what goes to asset management. And I'm kind of surprised. I'm not sure I agree that they weren't doing asset management before you came here, because we were putting money away as long as I was on council in the 90s. So that's been happening for a long, long time. Was it as much as we are putting away today? No, it's not. I also am a bit of an optimist with respect to our current situation from a capital perspective. It's great that staff identified in a report during one of our education opportunities where we are. It's often a worst case scenario, and that's what they've got to share with us. We will survive. There are municipalities, many municipalities, and some in this very region that have a worse situation on a relative basis with respect to asset management than we do. So I'm not as concerned as you are in that respect. The core services review is showing us how we can deliver services more efficiently. And at the end of the day, that's how we're going to save money and continue to provide a reasonable service back to our public. The notion of what residents are paying, it's way more than a couple bucks a month. Let's be honest, that's not quite correct. It's considerably more than that. It was considerably more than that last year. I hope it's not that this year. I'm disappointed, but frankly, by what I've heard so far around the table. I don't know how you expect staff to come back with a document that is going to satisfy your requirements when you're not giving direction. We can't possibly identify tonight those services that we currently offer residents that staff should look at to pare back. I don't think that's a reasonable discussion. Why? Because I don't think we have all the information that we need to make that suggestion. And I don't think that we'll know, frankly, until the core services review is complete, which is giving us all an opportunity to see how the nuts and bolts are of the organization. And we're only halfway through that process. And we really haven't taken a deep dive into the numbers yet with respect to what came back to us from the consultant. I use as an example of that much has been made of the pool and the senior center. And I understand the emotion behind it. But staff has not had the opportunity to come back and share with this council what the safety issues are, or what the state of the infrastructure is. And I think before you can make that decision, you have to know these things, and we don't know that today. And yes, in principle, I don't see the value of closing a pool and driving 20 kilometers to Oakville to swim outside. But I also need to know that the facility is safe and that the infrastructure is sustainable. So it's that kind of a discussion at a larger level about every service we provide. You know, to me, this is just common sense. Every organization I've been associated with, whether it was nonprofit, whether it was this one, whether it was a business, we were given or gave direction with respect to, you know, what the annual increase should be. It's how we became the community we are, as I said, and it's how we will be the community that we want to be in the future. You've got to provide direction. That's what managers do.
Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to further my colleague, Councillor Hamid's comments regarding the bus, the GO bus that was recently discontinued, and the problems and the emails and the calls both of us got. Just flip through this Milton Youth Strategy Report. I encourage everybody to check page 24. The point says transportation. Youth are asking for more transportation. They're asking for more ways to move around town. Their parents are forced to drive them around, which leads to a parking situation. The driveways are too small to accommodate a second car, and so it goes on and on and on. Just for the month of July, our parking enforcement department had at least 1,000 complaints, people coming in with their tickets in their hands. We are running to the skin of our teeth. So I really think that, you know, we need to consider these factors for the growing community we live in. And also, just as an ending point, I find it really disturbing that certain members of council keep bringing up campaign promises to the point where I'm led to believe that this is what this is for them. You know, these numbers are some campaign promise they made. And I would be really cautious in using this kind of terms of campaign promises really freely and throwing it out there, because we don't want to send this message to our residents. We're not here because of a number we gave during our campaigns. We are here because we are looking at the situation right here in front of us, and we want to come out with the most responsible tax number that will make sure that we are aligned with our long-term strategy. Thank you.
Councillor Malveaux.
Yeah, very briefly, just I can see the way this is going, and we're going to end up passing the report as is. Staff will start at 9%, and we'll end up like we did last year. We deliberated for 5-6 hours, and I think we cut 1% out of from the staff recommendation. I suspect that's where we're going here. We'll start at 9. We'll get it down to 7.5, 8. Then we'll pat ourselves on the back because we got it down from 9 to 8. So again, that's where I think it's going. Again, I look forward to seeing the recommendations for those members of council who are supporting, who look like they'll be supporting major tax increases. Okay, I'll be bringing forth some cuts, as I'm sure Councillor Chalonar will, and let's see what happens. But I can tell you, and don't forget, whatever we impose this year will be on top of the 8% we imposed last year. Okay, so if it'll be 8 on top of 8. Right? Just 2 years of this council.
Councillor Dirksen.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify my position, I'm not opposed to directing staff. I don't think anyone here is. And I'm not necessarily opposed to directing them to come back with a specific number if it's going to be a good use of their time and if it's going to bring us closer to a sound result. I don't know if it's appropriate to ask staff their opinion. I know we direct them and they do what we direct them to do, but I'm just wondering if it's going to be a worthwhile exercise.
Mr. Cohen.
Through the chair, so if there is a direction given for a specific number, staff's process with the recommendation as written would be, knowing fully well council is going to want to know what options are available to manage what the tax rate would be. We would take that away just like we did last year and develop what that list would look like. If council passes a specific range, what that'll mean is that at a staff level, we'll just decide which ones will be presented as within the range that's been provided and which ones had to be removed from the budget in order to get there. To a comment earlier, recognizing it is council's role to approve the service levels provided, whether we take it out in advance or whether council does it through the discussion of the entire list, there'll be enough transparency and certainty to know that it's council's decision as to those service levels, whether it's part of the staff recommendation or a further change that council would like to see.
Anything further?
I'm not sure I feel much better about my question. I guess we'll leave it at that. Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Okay, is there any further speakers on the amendment to Mayor Krantz?
Chairman, I agree with Councillor Malbuff there. We're starting to spin our wheels if we're not very careful here, that's for sure. I suspect you're probably going to deal with the motion that Councillor Challoner's got on the floor, and I, think I know where we're heading. So I think it's important, Mr. Chairman, that each one of us stand up and be counted. So I'm calling for a recorded vote on this, and this is early on. We're not going to be dealing with the budget tonight, but at least, the public staff will have a sense where we're heading. Let me assume for a moment that the amendment's going to pass from 3 to 5. Pretty well assure you, that it'll come in at 4.9. It'll stay under 5. But it'll be 5% if that was the will of council. And staff would take that very seriously. They really would. But if they have an open blank check, guess where we're going to come in? 9%. Mr. Chairman, it was 8% last year, and I'm not a mathematician. But 9% this year, 9% next year, and it's in the report. All of a sudden, just in 3 years, we're talking about 26, 27% tax increase. Well, but, 2022 is an election year. We might get it down. Oh, we won't be putting it up too high then, will we? It might be just 2 or 3 to make us look good. I'm not in this business to look good. So, with that, call the vote.
Councillor Challoner, did you want to add anything to that?
A couple of things very quickly. I think we have a solution, Councillor Alley, with respect to transit. And, the issue with the GO bus is not a Milton Council issue. That was the province of Ontario's decision. And I understand it was based on poor usage of the bus. And, I think if you had an issue, then bring forward a motion before council and suggest that it be reinstated and see where that goes. But we've suggested a solution, a hybrid transit solution for this community. It may come to pass in 2021 with the master plan that would be 24/7 basically service. Uber, traditional buses, etc. So, I think we can manage that one. The last thing was the 5%. So, before the discussion this year, there was a discussion last year about what staff saw as a sustainable series of budgets to maintain, the current municipal way of life in this community, and it was 5.1%. And I acknowledge what I see on page 13. But again, I say, I have a staff report from a year ago that says 5.1%. And I think that's quite achievable, and that's why I've suggested 3 to 5, because I think it's important for council to see what 3% looks like and what 4% looks like, and I'd like to see myself. And I'm certainly, as I said before, not advocating the rate of inflation this year because of where we were last year. It needs to be stepped down. Not a drop down. So I'd appreciate the support for the motion. It's important that everybody has the direction they need. And I think that at the end of this exercise, I think you'll be glad you did it.
We have the amendment on the floor. Does anyone need it clarified? If not, a recorded vote's been asked for. All those in favor of the proposed amendment, please stand.
Mayor Krantz, Councillor Challoner, Councillor Malbuff, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, Councillor Best.
All those opposed, please stand.
Councillor Cluett, Councillor Ali, Councillor Di Lorenzo, Councillor Hamid.
Motion's carried 5-4. On the main motion with the change for the deletion of item 4 and the change to the 3 to 5%. Any questions on the staff recommendation? If none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to our next item 2, the Milton Transit Service Delivery Contract. Is there any questions or comments on this? Councillor Hamid.
Yeah, just a quick question. Is there, again, this is, considering it's an election year, is there anything residents or other councillors can do to increase the probability of success, or is it strictly, whatever, is it strictly, I'm losing words anyway. That's the end of my question.
Mr. Cripps.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, since we're applying for funding through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure program, and some of these funding, no, not that anyone would admit it.
Wrong report.
Did I?
Sorry, item 2, this is the Milton Transit Service Delivery Contract.
Never mind, I spoke too soon.
That's okay. You're a little ahead of your time. Councillor Challoner.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My question just relates to whether or not the Commissioner sees any potential issues with this agreement in the context of our new master plan.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, none at all. Our partnership with PW Transit has been very effective over the years. They've always worked with us very well in regards to service changes, so I don't see any issues there. They would have to be negotiated, obviously, but we've had a great working relationship with them.
And negotiate is an important point, Mr. Chairman. You know, if there's a service change, for example, in a year, that can be contemplated, I assume.
Sorry, was that a question to staff? Okay.
Saying by what the Commissioner said, I'm assuming that if there is a service level change, that can be contemplated within the agreement.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's correct, yes.
Anything further, Councillor Challoner? Councillor Cluett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As with most of our stuff, the things that when we're dealing with contracts, and this is, I know this is a 3-year contract extension. The other elephant in the room, obviously, is something that's going to happen mid-November, and I was just wondering if there are accommodations in the contract should, or if anything should change at the local municipal level, pending any responses from the provincial government regarding the regional review.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes, so the contract does contemplate that and does give us some flexibility. We anticipate we would need the full term regardless to deal with any transition, and actually some of the existing other systems may actually need a longer time frame if something did come from that, we suspect, but there is flexibility.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Malbuff.
Okay, Councillor Cluett raised one of the questions. So there will be some safeguards in there should there be some changes following the review in November?
Correct, yes.
Okay, and to staff, prior to making this recommendation to extend the contract for 3 years, did we do any investigation? Did we do any tendering? Did we look to see if there's anybody else out there available that could provide a service that we could compare with?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, you'll see on page 5 of the report, there are a comparison of other transit providers that use a private contractor. So we are confident that we are within market.
Anything further?
No, again, you know, I have some concerns committing this much tax dollars without a proper tendering service, but no sense flogging a dead horse here.
Any further speakers on this item? If not, you have the staff recommendation before you. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. And Councillor Hamid, we're getting back to your item, number 3, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program.
Thank you. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong fund. So I should have taken that time to write my question down. So we're applying for $7.2 million for a facility where we need additional $40 million. If the council, this council, the future council decides not to fund that to the same capacity, are we able to leverage that $7.2 million for a smaller center or something else, or is that money that we don't get if we don't, like, I'm just trying to understand how that works, because the report didn't clarify it.
The final details would be in the transfer payment agreement, but our experience typically is what it's approved for, you're generally pretty tied to it, that it's very difficult within these programs to change course once you're through the approval process and have the transfer payment agreement in place.
Right. So I remember that transit presentation from a couple of months ago, but I don't remember the details that well. If we didn't have that extra $40 million, would we still be able to use these $7 million to do something, that's related to the funding that we got?
Couldn't say with certainty yet, but I suspect we may miss the opportunity if we do the application based on this facility and wait a couple of years and then try to make a change in direction. We have tried to do that with other funding streams through similar programs, and we haven't had any success to date in making significant changes on scope like that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Dirksen.
Thank you. Just a question with respect to the encouragement of applicants to include projects that increase connectivity between municipalities. Is that going to be part of the proposal going forward? And if so, which particular projects would they be?
We did notice that as well, and the other options we had considered from the Transit Master Plan did consider routes that went beyond our town borders. This specific application, obviously, the greatest benefit will be to the town services. I could certainly look in discussions as we're putting together the details of the package, whether this facilitates greater potential for those and whether we include that in the language, but this is definitely a primarily Milton-focused, Milton-benefiting initiative.
Any further speakers on this item? Councillor Chalmers.
Mr. Chairman, I just had a question of staff around the size of the project that we're looking at. Is there any way, or are we kind of baked in terms of putting together a slightly leaner project? Because my understanding from the discussion about the current proposed facility at $40 million was, the feeling was it was kind of rich. And, is there a way to pare it back and still have most of the use that we anticipate we need, or is it too late?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's part of the reason why we brought the report back to council, I'm going to say 2 or 3 months ago, outlining the program. I can remind council that the proposed building is being phased, so this is really just for the first phase. Then as the transit system grows, there will be a second phase. I'm going by memory now, so I think it was something like 8 or 9 years out for the basically doubling of the service bays and the storage area within the building.
Yeah, was the first phase, Commissioner, like, is it 26 million? And I've got that number in my head, and I may be wrong. Maybe it was higher than that. Is that right?
It is right. The 26 million was the construction cost only. Then when you factor in the land acquisition, the design, and the contingency, that's what brings it up to the $40 million project that you see. There is a second phase then, which is the remainder of the facility that Mr. Cripps mentioned.
On that basis, Mr. Chairman, I have no objection to this.
Any further speakers on this item? Just to sum up on this, we have a staff recommendation, just for my 2 cents to staff. I'd ask them to work with both regional and provincial bodies in terms of possibly using some of their buildings and property. I understand that with the regional review, we may have some changes coming up in transit. So I know the region has some other ideas for possible combined buildings, similar to what we're doing with the fire hall and paramedics offices. So that's my 2 cents. And is there any, we have the motion before you, signed by Councillor Ali and Hamid. Any questions on the motion? If not, all those in favour? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item number 4, we have a notice motion by Councillor Di Lorenzo reducing litter and waste to our communities that was moved at last. Councillor Di Lorenzo.
Yes, very briefly. This is sort of like bringing apart a return and deposit system, similar to where you all know about beer bottles and beer cans and LCBO. Right now in Ontario, about 98% of beer bottles do get returned, but less than 50% of plastic bottles get returned. That's a high cost to the province, high cost to the municipalities. We can look at neighboring other provinces in Canada who have very successful return and deposit systems. Alberta, for one, has had one for decades, and they have over 83% of plastic bottles do get returned. Some of us around council might have memories of being children looking for beer bottles and beer cans. I remember as a young teenager going into parks and finding beer bottles and getting money. Now that I'm older, I'm wondering, why are there beer bottles in public parks? But you can't really find those anymore littering our streets or our parks, because they get grabbed so fast and they get returned. So this was actually a report, the province of Ontario did release a discussion paper where they're considering this as well as other options. They're considering bans on things like straws and other single-use plastics. This is just addressing drink containers, nothing else. And it's us asking the province to please consider this and look at their discussion paper that they released and implement a deposit and return program. We aren't giving the province direction on what type of a return program to implement. There's ones in New Brunswick that's private partnerships. There's ones in Alberta. There are different systems in Canada on how to do deposit returns. They're not dictating how to implement it. We're just asking them to have a deposit return program in Ontario, which has already been highly successful in other provinces in Canada. So this would save both municipalities money, and it would save Canada as well as money, and it would help our environment. This was already passed by other municipalities in Halton Region. The plan is if all of the local municipalities in Halton Region pass this, regional councillors are planning on bringing this forward for Halton Region as a whole. So my hope is that Milton would pass this, and that then there's 2 other municipalities considering this in the next month or so. This would have no budget impact to the town of Milton. Again, it's just asking the province to look at this.
Yeah, Councillor Chandler.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So the issue here is that the time for discussion by the province of Ontario was passed. The opportunity for input ended in early May, and since that time, the province has come out with its position, and its position is to enhance the blue box. That's a position supported by AMO, and adopt full producer responsibility. So today, 50% of the blue box in Halton is paid for by industry. 50% is paid for by taxpayers. The proposal is it would be 100% paid for by industry, and might well be managed by industry as well going forward. So what I worry about, Councillor Di Lorenzo, is by passing this and sending it off to Queen's Park, we're going to look somewhat foolish, because actually we were asked, and there was a letter that came from the minister to this municipality asking us for our views on this particular topic. I did respond because of, I have an interest in it. I was involved in the development of the blue box in Halton in 1989. And so I don't want this municipality to look out of step with AMO, first of all, and I don't want us to look foolish, looking like we aren't on top of our game, not responding in a timely fashion to issues raised by the province. And so I can't support this for that reason. Let me also sort of talk secondarily about this and what it means for the blue box in Ontario. The 3 most valuable items in the blue box are aluminum, plastic, and newsprint. And Halton Region generates millions of dollars from its recycling program, and its recycling program is far higher than 50%. 50% is an old number in the province of Ontario for plastic. So if we take beverage containers out of the blue box and have a deposit return system, that will kill the blue box in Ontario because it relies on those funds to survive. Every municipality in the province of Ontario that has a blue box system sells the aluminum, the plastic, the glass, the newsprint that is collected, and that helps to fund the system. That's why we don't have a deposit return system in Ontario. That's why there isn't one in Manitoba, okay? And we have the example in British Columbia of a deposit return system where they later brought in the blue box, and it's become very expensive for taxpayers in that province. It doesn't operate efficiently, but it needs to work, and it will work over time, but it's going to be very costly for industry and very costly for taxpayers in the province of British Columbia. So beyond that, the most efficient system in Canada, and one of the most efficient systems in the world, and you've heard me say this before, is Manitoba, which doesn't have a deposit return system. It has a blue box system that today is somewhere between 75 and 80% diversion, and it's going higher every year. And the reason why is there's a continuous education program in that province where they spend $1 per Manitoban reminding them to recycle. And that really is the solution. It's a solution that would be in the best interest of the province of Ontario. I can tell you that not only is AMO supportive of what the province is proposing, but so is industry. Industry recognizes its responsibility. And so, you know, there was a time for this. That time has passed. And I don't think you want to see Halton Region damaged financially because of consideration of a deposit return system, now knowing how the blue box is funded. And I would add that it would be a double whammy for beverage containers to come out of the blue box, because today, and this has been a historical situation that is yet to change, the publishing industry, magazines and newspapers, don't contribute to the blue box system, yet they contribute most of the volume that is found in the blue box system. So they're not paying their fair share. Today they're being subsidized by the beverage industry and everybody else who participates in that system. So if you want to know more, you know my background. Glad to have the conversation. Sorry to bore you. And I'm sorry I can't support this, but the time for discussion has passed. We're on the way to action in the province of Ontario, and I think it's the right way.
Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm the seconder for this motion, and I appreciate the opportunity to be allowed to speak. I would like to thank Councillor Di Lorenzo for his research on this, and I want to say that we recently declared a climate emergency, and this is just a continuation of that. We recently did the Good Neighbors Day, and we, with our own eyes, were able to see 70% of the garbage we collected was single-use plastic and aluminum. It was evidence right there in front of us. And if you sit with any of the kids today, they will talk to you about the environment. They will talk to you about opportunities on helping us protect the environment, and I think this would be a great opportunity for them to pitch in, as you said. And I think companies like Nestle, and for example, you know, they're the biggest polluters, and I think they should be held accountable for the pollution. And as far as the blue bins go, that's fine. If the bottles are out of there, I'm pretty sure they'll make room for the election flyers. Thanks.
Councillor Tessler-Dirksen.
Yeah, Councillor Ali kind of cleared up my question. I was really looking for clarification on the scope of the motion, because it's reducing litter and waste in our community. It's not an effort to divert products from the blue bin. I think we put our beer cans and wine bottles in our blue box because we can't be bothered to return them, and we have people come and dig them out, I mean, on occasion. But for the most part, it's people kind of by the roadside going through the ditches and picking up aluminum and glass for cash, I would presume. So I just want to focus kind of on the scope of the motion as it being an effort to reduce the stuff that gets tossed out the window. If you could get Tim Hortons on board to get a deposit system for their coffee cups, you guys would be golden, because that's by far the most garbage that I see. But I'll be supporting the motion.
Okay, Councillor Chandler.
Clarification. Waste audits have been done, and frankly, Councillor Dirksen is right. The most pollution found on our roadsides and in our ditches is actually coffee containers. It's not beverage containers. And while I haven't been an employee of Nestle's for 4 years, they're not the biggest polluter, and I don't think that's a fair comment, and I would hope you would retract that. That's not a fair statement. I've done waste audits in Sarnia, I've done them in Richmond Hill, and in other municipalities in Ontario, and glad to share those with you. And you know, beverage containers are less than 1% of the waste stream. Councillor Dirksen is right. It actually is paper products that are what you see most of all in ditches and on roadways and in parks. And it's, you know, I'll gladly share the audit. This is not about reduction of literature. This is litter. This is actually a motion about developing a new system to collect. To be clear, when you're asking somebody to pass a motion that brings in a waste program like deposit return system, that's what the motion is about. And as I indicated at the outset, the province has made its decision. We had the opportunity to participate. Some of us did as individuals, but we didn't as a council. And I don't want us to look like we're offside. This is an important discussion. The current program in Ontario is a $100 million program, and currently we're paying for half of it. And I agree with where the province is going with this, and I agree with what Amo is saying, but let's not be confused by what this is and what it's not.
Mayor Krantz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't think that this would be the big one of the evening, save and accept budget there. I committed this meeting, of course, you know, supporting this wholeheartedly, believe it or not. But after hearing what Councillor Chandler has just mentioned there, it's easy enough for us, and including me, to look foolish at the best of times. And I know that you sit on the AMO board, and Councillor Chandler alluded to AMO's position on it, and you might be able to shed a bit of light on it, but I'm just wondering aloud now, recognizing that the bus has already left the station, if we shouldn't recognize, if this goes forward, on recognizing that that it's already, that deadline is already passed, and we recognize that, if we feel strongly enough about it to recognize that we're a little late on it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, you might have a comment or two where AMO is on it.
Thank you for putting me on the spot, Your Worship. Yeah, as Councillor Chandler is correct, but in terms of AMO and the producers and the province making an agreement for 100%, that took about 5 years to get there, and as Councillor Chandler knows, it's a lot of negotiations. From basically, I understand the thrust of Councillor Di Lorenzo's motion to do this, but you know, it is contrary to where, you know, AMO and the province is going right now. It's a great thought in terms of reducing, because I agree with all the comments here. There is still a lot of waste, even with deposit returns. And by the way, I still see a lot of beer and wine bottles, you know, in the ditches and roadways in my area of town. So almost it must be hanging out in my neighborhood. But on this, you know, we still, at the AMO board, we just have to look at the weekly reports. We still have a number of resolutions coming in. Whether the timeline was passed or not, it's up to this council to decide whether they want to be on this or just, you know, take the AMO board position, because it is a complicated, and basically it's not going to be over tomorrow. So I'm in your hands on this one. Councillor Di Lorenzo on this point.
So this is a reducing litter and waste motion. As I mentioned, 98% of beer bottles get returned. Less than 50% of plastic drinking containers get returned. This isn't meant to replace the blue box. I understand what AMO is doing. I understand what the province is doing. There are other municipalities who have passed this after May. They haven't been castrated as looking foolish. It's occurring in other municipalities in Ontario. It's not meant to replace the blue box. Again, it's meant to reduce litter. There's a reason why 98% of beer bottles get returned and less than 50% of plastic containers get returned. So at the end of the day, you have to make a decision. Are you looking to improve the environment, or are you looking to just what is the bottom dollar? I understand that if you use a return on bottle system, then that could have a financial hit to the blue box system, because some of those plastic containers are not going in the blue box. Maybe they're going to return and deposit system. But realizing we're only capturing less than 50%, I know there can be some gains on education to increase those numbers, but if you look at the provinces that have the highest amount of return on plastic, I'm talking about plastic bottles, Diet Coke, water, they're the ones that have those return and deposit systems, because then you have an incentive to return them. You have kids, families looking for those containers and returning them. Right now, sadly, that a lot of those are going in our landfills. They're going in our waste systems. Again, I would look at the province of Alberta. I would look at New Brunswick. I would look at how you're actually reducing waste. I think this has the best possibility to bring that number higher, approaching the high 90s. I do want to see the blue box system improved and continued, but at the same time, I'm looking at reducing litter and waste in our communities. And I believe that this motion has already been passed by other municipalities, with other municipalities still looking at this and considering this today, is the best possibility to get that number in the high 90s.
Councillor Malveuf?
Yeah, just very briefly, I'll not be supporting the recommendation based on the comments of Councillor Chalonar, and again, and your comments about where AMO is on this issue. We're a participating member of AMO, and I believe we should be supporting their position as well. So again, I understand the intent of this, but I'm also a little confused as to how such a program would work. Okay? I get my bottled water and pop from the grocery store, the convenience store. Am I supposed to take my bottles back to them, or is the beer store going to take over it? Okay? So again, this thing is I'm a little confused about how this whole system will work, but again, I'll not be supporting it. I do not have, the impact it would have at the regional level in our waste diversion plan and the recycling is a concern as well. So hopefully the majority of council will vote against this.
Any further speakers on this item? We have a motion moved by Councillor Lorenzo, seconded by Councillor Ali. Any questions to the motion? If not, all those in favor? 3, 4, 5. Opposed? Motion is carried. Moving on to item number 5, notice of motion by Mayor Krantz to waive the rules of procedure. Is there any questions to this item? We need a majority. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Item 6, Mayor Krantz, if you'd like to speak to this, is the support of Conservation Halton's request of consultations.
Chairman, thank you very much. It's pretty well self-explanatory, and every one of the municipalities in the Halton watershed will be dealing with this as well. And we do have the CAO here, and I know that he was prepared to respond to any questions, but Councillor Cluett and I were chatting earlier on. It's my understanding that CAO might like to address Council very briefly on this matter, because there's maybe 1 or 2 items that I might not be able to, we might not be able to touch on that he can on the importance of this. So, Chairman, I would move that CAO Conservation Halton be heard if he wishes to be a delegation.
Have a seconder on that? That's Councillor Cluett and Ali. All those in favor? I hear all those in favor. Mr. Bissett, if you'd like to come forward and speak to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Your Worship. maybe I'll provide a little bit of context as to what got us to this point and what has transpired since. But more importantly, I appreciate the steps that you're proposing here at Council, and would like to make myself available to answer any questions with regards to the Conservation Authority, our budgets, or what's going on with the province. So to give a bit of context, Bill 108, you'll all be familiar with that. The Conservation Authorities Act was wrapped within that bill. The bill passed, so changes to the CA Act have been made. What remains now is for the minister to make regulations. So when it comes to our hazard policies, they're looking at regulations. And the concern really arose when we received some correspondence from the Minister of Environment asking us to start winding programs down without really any direction, without any mention of consultations, without any indication that there was an understanding at the provincial level as to what the impact of those programs would be on the local communities, and more importantly, without really any evidence that they understand how those programs are funded and who benefits from those programs. So our board and all of the mayors in Halton, as well as the regional chairman, took a position on that, and they wrote that letter and discussion paper. That letter has been received at Queen's Park. There has been follow-up. Just last Friday, Milton MPP Perm Gill came to meet with me at the CH office, and it was a productive meeting. He was making an effort to really understand what it is that Conservation Halton does, and more importantly, what is it that we don't do. We've since received a reply back from the Minister of Natural Resources as well, but that reply stopped well short of promising what it is we're asking in this letter, and I don't think we're asking for anything unreasonable here. We're asking that before the province goes into regulation making, that they're not led by sound bites that they're hearing around the table, but are in fact led by facts. And I know that they're not being led by facts. So that letter that we received in response to this letter merely stated that we'll notify you once we post something. And the way things are going, that means a posting on the EBR and then a few days and then it's gone. And that's really, I think, not a good way for us to proceed. We're talking about regulations here that impact our community, that impact Milton, probably more than they impact any other municipality, given the debate you've had and the growth and what role we play. And at its very core, the role that we play is that we work in conjunction with planning department at the town and in other municipalities to ensure that any growth and development that's occurring within the town of Milton, that the risk from flooding and natural hazards is mitigated to the provincial standard. And I'll repeat that again. It's a provincial standard. These are not bylaws of the Conservation Authority or policies that we enact. And then that's our job. It's ensuring that every new home that's built in Milton is not going to flood when we have that regulated storm. So I feel that this really is an investment in the resiliency of the community, and that is the core of core programs that we offer. And related to that are our flood control program. So we own and operate and manage 4 dams, all upstream of Milton, 2 of them in Milton. You're well aware of the flood channel that we have. We have 12.5 kilometers of channels. We own them. We're responsible for all of the repairs related to those channels. The asset value of just those dams and channels is over $100 million, and they were built in the 60s. And they're not legacy items. They are operated constantly to regulate flows through Milton down into the southern municipalities and then over into Lake Ontario. And in addition to that, there's everything else that's referenced in the letter. There are the operation of our conservation areas, the jobs, and the public value that those conservation areas offer. And the only other thing I'll state is, I'm sure members of this council are aware, and if you weren't, you certainly are after that letter, we do not put any tax dollars into our conservation areas, not 1 cent. We're the only conservation authority that does that. We in fact generate a return on those services. So I'm quite proud of the fact that we've responsibly monetized these assets to provide public good, but also generate revenues, which are then put back into improving services in these parks, and also offsetting some of the core services that, by legislation, should be paid for by the taxpayer. So we feel we run this organization very responsibly, and we have a budget that's touching $35 million, and roughly 30% of that is tax supported. And the province today, on the operating side, contributes $145,000 to that budget. So they really are not at the table the way they should be, and they did cut that budget, the 145, in half in March. So well after the start of our fiscal year, we've had to absorb those cuts, and cutting budgets for flood operations in the spring is never a good option, and it certainly didn't play well. So we're hoping that in addition to consultations, and that's all we're asking for at this stage, that the province also review what it means for the province to commit to these core services.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, and thank you for your patience tonight, too, as well, waiting for us. Councillor Cluett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Bassett, for coming out to clear up a lot of things, because when we're seeing these items in the media, a lot of people aren't really understanding what is a core service, and then I think that's what we're asking is the provinces is what are you identifying as that core service, and a lot of the other operations that go on in our conservation authorities, our Conservation Halton Authority. You mentioned the number of jobs, and I think that was one of our headline items that we had in the local media, was the number of jobs that Conservation Halton provides in our community. Can you expand a little bit more on the impact of potentially losing all of these jobs?
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Chair. The number fluctuates, the seasonal employments. Over the past few years, we've averaged around 800 jobs, and last year, I believe, we paid $4.3 million in wages to those people that were employed, and none of those wages were, again, tax supported. They were supported by the operations of these programs. Furthermore, as this council is in fact aware, because for a few years we started a pilot bus transit program to Kelso, and the reason for that is a vast majority of these seasonal employees are actually youth. They're younger workers from the town of Milton and from other neighboring municipalities, and so I think there are jobs, and then there's youth employment, and when we bring these seasonal employees into Glen Eden, for instance, that's where the vast majority go. They're not just there to do a job and get a paycheck. We, over the past few years, have taken a very progressive approach to actually investing in them. So they're workforce ready, so they have some exposure to leadership, to proper health and safety, to managing their own time as it relates to work and school and everything else. So again, there's a number of employees and jobs that could be under threat, but then there's value beyond that would be lost.
Some of the other programs that I think that could be highlighted is from an educational standpoint. I know that a number of students in our community go on regular trips to Conservation Halton and the different parks. And again, I know we're heading in a long hour, but I do want to have the public understand what kind of programs Conservation Halton provides for students from an educational standpoint. If you can just highlight a few of them.
Certainly. Between Crawford Lake and Mountsburg, two of our education centers, we have been averaging around 65,000 students a year. Just think of that number for a minute. That's 65,000 students that come in there on their school trips to learn about various programs related to First Nations, related to the environment, sustainability. These are all outdoor experiential education programs. They're linked to the curriculum. And I think it's, and we have these students come from far afield, from Waterloo, from Peel region. And if you're a Halton resident and your kids go to Halton, I think it's very neat that we have this resource right in Halton where you can very easily come to these education programs. Now, those education programs are slightly subsidized by Halton region, and we're appreciative of that support. But again, that's invested just in those education programs.
And thank you. Just as a final comment, I know that I sit on the Conservation Halton Board, as well as Mayor Krantz, Councillor Hamid, and Councillor De Lorenzo, and we're all just very concerned and waiting for that word of consultation in its truest standpoint. The last letter that we received said, "We will notify you of any changes." That's a far cry from consultation before changes. So the legislate and then negotiate thing doesn't work in a lot of ways. So thank you very much for your leadership on this, and fully support our motion tonight.
I just also, just for questions only, the presentation, so I have comments later, but Councillor Tusser-Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I was one of those students who benefited from trips to Crawford Lake and Mountsburg, and actually did a co-op in high school at Crawford Lake, so I know the good work that Conservation Halton does through its education programs. My question, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer off the top of your head, but the practical impact of the proposed cuts, or the cuts that the province has handed down to you, where are they going to be felt most? Where's the focus going to be? Is it going to be in flood mitigation, and are we going to see a decrease in focus on that?
So excellent question. So when the province cut that funding, it was cut from the flood program. And so the impact of those cuts is on the flood program. As an organization, are we going to allow that to happen? No. And there are two reasons for that. One, that is not a service level that you can neglect. And number two, we're in the midst, as of two years ago, and our board members will know this, in the midst of actually modernizing. So we're not happy with where the service level is today. As I mentioned, these are assets built in the 60s. We're modernizing, we're bringing in technology. To give you maybe one quick example of what that looks like, we now have, over the last 2 years, digitized our network. So we have better capabilities to forecast what is going to happen given a certain rain event. We have capabilities to know how our dams and channels are going to react, and we've cut down the lead time between us finding out what a flood advisory or a flood watch looks like and actually notifying the public. And so we've gone from having 8 or 9 weather stations to 35 digitally connected weather stations. So not only are we not going to allow those impacts to harm this, we're actually going to continue to invest in those, and that's been challenging. Even though on paper, you may look at a $35 million budget, but because only a small portion of that is tax supported, the $145,000 that the province cut equates to a 1.4% cut in our budget. So that's 1.4%, and you're in budget mode tonight. That is essentially being downloaded on the municipalities through the Conservation Authority this year.
Councillor Chalner.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I sit on the GRCA board. The cut that we received was not specific. It was a cut to their grant to us, and so it wasn't related to flood mitigation. As a matter of fact, GRCA just received a $90,000 grant, 50% province, 50% federal government, towards flood mitigation. So essentially, staff at GRCA were left to find the $435,000. And at this point, we've found $300,000 roughly. So GRCA is not facing a situation where a core service, which flood mitigation is, I mean, conservation authorities were established as a result of Hurricane Hazel to deal with floods. So my question is, have you had a consultation with the province at this point? GRCA at this point has met with the minister at AMO, and felt it was a relatively fruitful discussion. What steps have you and the board at Conservation Halton taken to get to Queen's Park and have the conversation?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. So I'll first address your comment regarding where the cuts came from. So the cuts were made to Section 39, and that is the section that's supposed to fund our flood forecasting and hazards program. So that is what was cut. I know what the GRCA is doing to mitigate their cuts, and they're dipping into reserves to mitigate some of those as well for this year, so that's not sustainable. The second thing is the grant that you referenced. Those are grants that you receive for your capital works, and you apply every year, and the province gives you 50 cents on the dollar if they have the money, and that's a pot of $5 million that's spread across the entire province. We are, as our board is well aware, repairing Kelso Dam, and the cost of that one repair is $8.5 million. That's one dam. There are hundreds in Ontario. So the funding level is inadequate, and those cuts were to the hazards program. Now, with regards to what we've done to reach out to Queen's Park, as I mentioned, I have had a meeting with our local MPP. That was good. We've written this letter. There are 36 conservation authorities in Ontario. We do not want, nor is it productive, for 36 conservation authorities to go to Queen's Park. So what we do instead is try and organize consultations in a more effective manner through the centralized body, which is Conservation Ontario. And I do believe that's the most effective way of engaging. So we try not to leverage our individual contacts. So all sorts of board members and CAOs from across the province are showing up at Queen's Park, or I think there's an education element, which is what we're doing through this board. And then what we're requesting is formal discussions. That's it. And these are consultations, I might remind you, that the province promised. They were promised to us when the CA Act was amended, and then that promise disappeared, and instead there was a letter saying maybe start winding down some services. So that's the approach we take. Whenever there is an opportunity to engage, we do. So last Friday, the flood advisor that the Premier has appointed was at GRCA. We were invited, we engaged, we made a presentation, and we shared resources and messaging with the Grand River Conservation Authority. So we do work in concert with one another. We do communicate, so if the Minister is coming to a meeting at the Grand, which he did, that information is shared with everybody, and we ensure that a consistent message is delivered on behalf of all the CAs. None of the CAs are out there trying to get ahead themselves. It's one set of organizations, and we all have the same job to do, so we try and be efficient in how we do that.
Have you identified, subject to the letter that you received from the Minister, what are your core programs and non-core programs? As a discussion paper you would share with the board so that they understood what the impact is.
Certainly. Again, through you, Mr. Chair, so great question. That is one of the things we're asking the province, is, what are the core programs and when are we going to consult on those? Now, when we received this letter from Minister Urick, it highlighted at a very broad, high level what they consider to be our core programs. And I may not get the wording quite right, but I'll list the four. One related to Lake Simcoe protection, which doesn't apply here. One related to source water protection, which we do and is core. The other related to our hazards function, and that's broad. So there's that. And the third one related to the management of all lands under our management or under our ownership, and that's where the parks come in. So when you look at that list, there's a lot that we do that is part of our core. But let's look at the stewardship program, where we work with the local agriculture community to help them make improvements on their land when they'd like to do that, right? So it's a completely voluntary. We work on a lot of forestry programs. We are spending close to $1 million a year removing hazard trees in Halton that have been impacted by emerald ash borer. That fits in a gray area. Stewardship is in a gray area. The environmental monitoring program is in a gray area. Some of our plan review comments that we work as contractors for our municipalities is the best way to put it, to provide some advisory comments. So each municipality in the region don't have to go out and create environmental review departments. Those are in a gray area. But I'll maybe end the statement by saying we have absolute clarity with our board and the region of Halton in terms of where municipal dollars go and which programs are funded out of which bucket. So there is no, so we're not mixing funds and asking for money for one thing and then subsidizing the others. And I think that that's one of the key points. The governance of the Conservation Authority, the accountability, the transparency resides with our board. Our board is municipally appointed. We have 3 mayors on our board, and 70% of the board are local councillors or regional councillors, and there are a few ex-board members around this table as well. So I think that's the key point here, is that, yes, we know most of what we do is part of the core, as the province has described, and what the province has said, or at least what they said at one point, was you have core programs and you should have the power to levy for those programs. And then you will have some programs that we understand are related to the effectiveness of those core programs, so like tree planting and hazard tree removal and stewardship, and those you should be able to negotiate with your municipality. So it's a willing buyer, willing seller. And that's how we approach our budget. For those of you who sit at Regional Council over the past 3 years, we provide a business plan where we say, this is what we do, this is who benefits from it, here's a standard we're committing to, including service delivery, turnaround times, all of that is very transparent, and this is how much it's going to cost. If you see value in it, please approve our request, and I'll emphasize that word. Never at our board or at our municipal councils have we said, here's a levy, pay it. It's always a request, and we arrive at it by working with our municipal partners essentially over 12 months. As soon as we get one budget approval, we're starting to work on the other one. And we've been very responsible with that this year, in spite the cuts, in spite inflation, in spite the fact that there's pressure on us to also grow our services, given that the region is growing. We are, at this point, looking at a 1.4% increase to our budget, and that includes operating capital and money for our state of good repair levy. So we've worked very hard to find efficiencies over the past 2 or 3 years, and it's all these things that I feel need to be brought up, and that's where, again, I'm very thankful for the mayors. I'm sure the mayors don't lend their name to these causes without doing their due diligence and actually seeing the value that's on display, and I'm very proud of the fact that under the governance of our board, we've been able to really morph the organization to where we think we're adding great community value.
GRCA staff is putting together a report for the board this fall that outlines core versus non-core. Don't know if that's of any value to know. You probably, if you were there last week, you've probably heard that. Just a point of clarification on the budget. It represents less than 1% of GRCA's budget, and the reductions have been completely found out of operating. There's no reserves going towards the operating budget this year. And I just want to say I've heard great things about you, and it's great to meet you finally.
Thank you.
Is there any further speakers or questions? If not, thank you for your presentation and answers. Councillor Di Lorenzo.
So I wanted to thank Mayor Krantz and Councillor Clute for bringing this motion forward. I'm going to ask for a recorded vote just because I hope this is going to be unanimous. I've read some of the information about what the province of Ontario is looking to do, and one thing that kind of surprised me is they're saying they want to bring these changes forward to help municipalities, to help us from a financial perspective, that making this reduction and making sure conservation authorities are only doing core services and doing a narrower are going to help us financially. But as we heard today, 1.4% is the budget from the province, and also most of the revenue, surprisingly, a good portion of the revenue comes from just the services. One item like Christmastown, it's sold out every year, and supply and demand. If Conservation Halton wanted to, if we wanted to, we could raise that fee to $500, $600, $700. People would pay for that. There are Conservation Halton events that get sold out year over year over year. And a lot of times when we're sitting at the board member, we were talking about some of the reason why the cost is what it, we understand what supply and demand means, but we also wanted to make it affordable to Milton residents. We want to make sure they go through these experiences. So Conservation Halton has a lot of purview over safety, over ways that will affect the safety factor of Milton residents and Halton Region residents. But it also provides many other services for Miltonians and Halton residents. There's many school trips and school classes to our conservation areas in Milton, and those are very well managed, and they get a high amount of the revenues through the service and user fees. Now, I understand that Milton and Halton Region does kick in financial funding, so there is a cost to the taxpayers, but we have our representation on Conservation Halton. If we feel that that is too much of a tax burden, we can make that change. I feel that right now the Halton municipalities are in the driver's seat for what Conservation Halton does or doesn't do, so I don't see how reducing Conservation Halton and looking to have them wind down their activities is going to be a financial windfall for the town of Milton or the Halton region. I want to again thank Mayor Krantz and thank Councillor Cluett for bringing this motion forward, and I'm very highly in favor for it.
Any other speakers on this item? A recorded vote's been requested. All those in favor, please stand.
Councillor Cluett, Councillor Ali, Mayor Krantz, Councillor Challenor, Councillor Di Lorenzo, Councillor Malbuff, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, Councillor Hamid, Councillor Best.
I think it's unanimous. Moving on, thank you for your presentation again. Regional Council update. Anyone wants to say a few items? It's too late. Just one reminder for myself, there is the farm tour. Anyone that hasn't replied to the invitation, it is this Thursday from 12 noon to 8 p.m. It's the 40th anniversary, and I understand Councillor Lee is going to be there, so it should be interesting. There is a confidential report that is there anyone wishes to go in camera on this one? Being none, any report here? If not, just move adjournment, and thank you, everyone. Thank you for reminding the bylaws. Yes, yeah. The commissioner is getting very anxious. We do have the bylaws as well. Any questions regarding the bylaws? I missed that. All those in favor? Motion's carried.
Wait, just a question of clarification, Mr. Chair. Not just the bylaws, but the confidential session. We're not going to the confidential session, but shouldn't we vote?
I'm just getting there. Be it resolved that recommendations contained in staff report ENGOs 2719 be approved. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you for correcting me. Anything else? Clerk informs me we've done everything here. All the move adjournment.